Cap and trade. What does it mean? We've heard that a little bit in the news. We know that Congress has voted to pass the cap and trade law. It's now being studied by the Senate, and some say there is no way that it could be passed. But will it? Gary Stearman is here, who's written an article, by the way, for our June 2009 edition of Prophecy and News magazine, in which he says green politics and the green revolution have created the green religion. Oh, you mean ecology is now a religion? Either God is God or Al Gore has another religion. Tell us about it, Gary.
Well, J.R., the religion that's being taught in the public schools, schools of higher education, and the information being disseminated by our government urges the worship of planet Earth. It says man is destroying this earth, and unless reined in and checked by various aspects of governmental control, it's all over. We're all dead. And J.R., that's the ultimate in secular thinking. It's the green religion.
Yeah, I smell a new government bureaucracy coming on, don't you?
Oh, yes, indeed. Well, cap and trade is simply capping the output of carbon in manufacturing processes and trading. That is, if you produce excess carbon, then you have to trade with some other corporate entity in order to balance things out. J.R., it's all a huge global tax. That's all it is.
A global tax. Another way of the government getting in money, and then what? Putting the people, our 10% unemployment, back to work, this time rebuilding society?
Sure, in whatever way that the reigning administration sees fit. But it all boils down to this. Mankind has overthrown the idea, or is in the process of overthrowing the idea, of a providential God who created everything, including the atmosphere, including the plants, the animals. The whole cycle of planet Earth is created and controlled by our Lord. Either that, or it's ecology, secular science, speaking about ecology and saying we have to be ecologically smart. And in fact, the worst insult they can heap on somebody is to be ecologically illiterate.
And that's the buzzword for this new religion, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now, Gary, it all started back many years ago, and maybe before then, but I recall this, all of this hoopla about acid rain. Tell us about what happened there.
Well, decades ago, the evergreen forests of the Northeast and some of the old oaks, some of the beautiful trees, the forests of Pennsylvania, Ohio, that region began to die. And they attributed it to acid rain, which they said came from the conversion of the belching smokestacks, the chemistry involved in producing iron and steel, changing the constitution of rain so that when it fell, it was acidic and it killed the trees. So the outcry was, J.R., let's stop steel production. Eventually that was done. Such strictures were put on the steel industry that it no longer became profitable to produce steel. They stopped producing steel. That steel production has moved abroad now, chiefly to China and other eastern countries.
Wow.
But
well,
guess what?
But thank goodness we don't have any acid rain now, killing all those trees up north, huh?
Wouldn't that be nice? Actually, the truth is we still have the acid rain. It's since been learned that the acid rain is part of natural processes and is periodic, it's cyclical. This is the truth about the created ecosystem in which we live. God created it in such a way that it goes through these long-term cycles which are easy to misinterpret.
Okay, now let's talk about coal, because coal is going to be the demon that is destroying our planet and all that carbon it's putting up into the atmosphere. Right. Tell us, how much of our atmosphere today is carbon?
Well, it's really interesting. Our atmosphere, and I maintain it was designed by God. It was designed to be self-sustaining, self-balancing, self-renewing. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.9% argon, and then you get down to carbon dioxide, the evil carbon dioxide, 0.035% of the atmosphere. JR, that's 1/3 of 1% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and it's vitally necessary for plant life.
Well, it's got to be poison. Isn't it poisonous?
Not at all.
Does it happen to be that stuff we breathe out after we breathe in oxygen?
Well, when we exhale, we're exhaling carbon dioxide.
Oh.
The plants inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. Now, it took a really clever designer to design that system.
So it's not poisonous.
It's not poisonous.
How's it going to kill us? What is this that the government says that we've got to control the emissions of carbon?
Well, as a matter of fact, the inconvenient truth, Al Gore's recent motion picture presentation said that carbon dioxide will rise at an extremely rapid rate and in the next few decades produce an irreversible situation that will cause sea levels to rise, it will cause plant life to die, it will cause deserts to form where there is now lush greenery. In other words, he says, we are destroying ourselves. JR, global warming. You don't hear much about it anymore. The EPA has just produced a document saying that for the last 10 or 11 years, global temperature has been falling, not rising.
Okay. Let's talk about Dr. Paul Ehrlich and his "the sky is falling" scenario back a couple of decades ago.
And more than a couple of decades ago, back in 1968, he wrote a book called The Population Bomb. JR, that book was the ultimate in hysteria. And in 1968, if you recall what was going on back there, it was the early part of the green movement. You had the hippies, the dropouts.
Yes.
You had the people who were earth worshippers, tree huggers. You had the people who were saying, we're destroying ourselves. Los Angeles smog is going to cover the entire world, you know? And that was the beginning of the green movement, but it was also the beginning of the movement that said that population would increase to the point that we would kill ourselves. And in 1968, Dr. Paul Ehrlich issued a series of scenarios. One of them, he said in 1972, news of the war in Thailand occupies the headlines of the United States. China has catastrophic floods, a breakdown of communications, massive famines. And he goes on about how the world, because of the consumption of resources by a burgeoning society, will collapse in war and in famine. That's what he said. Now, Paul Ehrlich is not a Christian, was not a Christian.
Yeah.
He was a secular scientist.
And his scenario number one failed by the mid-'80s, by the 1990s, simply because it didn't come off.
Didn't come off. Scenario two, he said. This is writing back in 1968. By the way, he was a respected scientist, given great respect by the media. In 1979, the last non-communist government in Latin America, that of Mexico, is replaced by a Chinese-supported military junta. Now, he says that all of this is going to happen because famine has swept repeatedly across Asia, Africa, and South America. Food riots have often become anti-American riots, as our enemies claimed we were withholding food to keep them from starving. Well, JR,
we're holding food. We're withholding food from the starving masses.
Right.
That's what Ehrlich said in 1968.
1968.
And yet America has fed more starving people than any other nation in history.
Absolutely. Scenario three, he says in 1974, the United States government finally realizes that food population balance in much of Asia, Africa, and South America is such that most areas cannot attain self-sufficiency. Well, he whipped the world media into a frenzy because in 1968 he said, and I am quoting, if the global population exceeds 2 billion, man will not be able to sustain himself on this planet. Okay? 2 billion,
okay.
JR. He said that back in 1968. And what's the population?
Well, we have 6.5 billion people in the world today, moving towards 7 billion. And what, we're still eating? We're
still eating. The point in quoting Paul Ehrlich, The Population Bomb, pages 72 through 79, if you want to look it up, that book is still out there. The point in quoting Paul Ehrlich is to say that this man was a noted scientist, given great credibility, dead wrong in every conjecture. And this is secular science.
Now, Gary, if there is no God, and if Jesus does not come back, and if we are all alone on this planet, in this universe, and we have to take care of everything, eventually Dr. Ehrlich scenario with the growing population could have some validity to it. But that's only if there is no God. But we know there is a God.
Well, that's why we have the green religion today, because our school children are being scrupulously taught, not just in this country, all over the world. Kids are being taught that they have to worship the planet. They have to save it. They have to save the water, keep the water clean. They have to make sure that they don't use too much energy. Turn those lights out and don't use too much hot water. Don't flush the toilet too often. Use the right kind of light bulb that doesn't draw too much wattage. Otherwise, we're all going to die. So says science. And we are actually being conditioned by fear. And the fear is that we're going to destroy ourselves. This is a fear that can only take place in a secular society that doesn't believe in a God.
Wow. Well, I'd like for you to get the June 2009 edition of Prophecy in the News and read this article for yourself. By the way, there are a number of articles here. Does Psalm 109 describe the Antichrist? The Ancient Book of Enoch, Part 5. And Tough Love, John's Doctrine of Christ, written by Gary Stearman. And so this particular magazine, I think, would be very vital for you to get and to read. I hope you will get it. Order it from us. Call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and get this article. I'd like for you to subscribe to Prophecy in the News so that for the next 12 months you can get our monthly analysis of the news and our latest in prophetic research. It's $34.95 for a year subscription, and you can get a bonus if you will call and order it. We want to ask you to get 4 free books. This is a $48 value for $34.95 for the magazine. That includes the shipping of shipping these books to you: The Mystery of the Menorah and the Hebrew Alphabet, Hidden Prophecies in the Song of Moses, They Pierced the Veil and Saw the Future, a study of the 12 minor prophets, and Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Plan to Rule the World. The research on the rise of the Antichrist and one world government. All of this can be yours free if you will subscribe to Prophecy in the News magazine. If you have the books or would prefer to have a series of lectures that I gave before a live audience at prophecy conferences, we have these DVDs available for you. One entitled The Legend of the Holy Grail, the other one the program called Birth Defect, and the third one, Job, the Oldest Prophecy in the Bible, and then last year's magazines on a PDF format, on a CD for your computer. They can be yours free. All you have to do when you call is say, I want the videos or I want the books. Your choice. But get our magazine, will you? Order it today and let us send it to you for the next 12 months. And Gary, if the Lord comes before their issues run out, see him about, not Gary, but see the Lord about the refund, will you?
Yeah.
And
right.
Who knows, the Lord's liable to make me refund everybody. I wouldn't doubt that possibility, but hey, if I just have enough to give your money back once we get to heaven, that's okay. I just want to be in the rapture. You know?
All right, and so do I, JR.
So call us today, will you, and get the magazine. Gary?
Well, continuing on, our president recently announced that in an effort to balance this planet, to keep it going, to make sure that everybody has enough food to eat, water to drink, air to breathe, our president says we must allow science to begin to step forward and play a greater role in our society today. And JR, Paul wrote to Timothy once about science, and it's amazing how prophetic these words are.
Isn't it though? He said, "O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called." He didn't have much of an opinion of science in his day.
No, as a matter of fact, it was the chief enemy of the gospel. The early gospel was going out in the days of the apostles. And everywhere they went, they ran up against people who were called Gnostics. These were often Judeo-Gnostics. They were secular Gnostics. They followed Greek philosophy. They followed the science of their day. And they deeply opposed the gospel and the idea that God created the world and so forth, and that He sent His only begotten Son. They were opposed to that idea. In other words, they were opposed to the idea that God is a providential God who blesses the environment. And notice what Paul says, J.R. He calls these proclamations of science profane and vain babblings. Profane means secular, vain means empty. Could you come up with a better description of today's science?
Well, profane or secular pronouncements by science, or whatever they want to call it, if it is profane, that is, if it is secular, does not recognize God, then it is babbling. Nothing but pure babbling. It has no validity to it. It has no reason to it. It is not reasonable in any way. And that's the way science has gone today, Gary. Science does not believe in God. I'm talking about secular science. They believe in evolution, that man evolved, and that we're here on this planet by ourselves. We don't have anybody we can pray to, no one we can get to fix things up. We're going to have to do it ourselves.
Well, J.R., thinking back to Dr. Paul Ehrlich in 1968, when he wrote his book, his answer to the problem was that he said there will be a social collapse because we will use up all of our resources. But that must be followed by rigorous authoritarian control of global society. Get these things back under control again. And it's fascinating that others have followed in his footsteps, and a new paradigm has emerged. It's commonly known as the Green Revolution. I like to call it the Green Religion because it worships the planet Earth. And one of its leaders is Dr. Friedhof Capra. Friedhof Capra, founder and director of the Center for Eco-Literacy, Berkeley, California. And in 1984, he wrote a book called Green Politics. And in this book, and in, by the way, in many other publications since that time, he advanced what he calls the new paradigm, a new model for the stabilization of planet Earth, which he sees as being threatened by human destruction. He's constantly critical of the old science, as he calls it, which teaches that global ecology can only be understood by studying its individual parts, biology and chemistry and the physics of weather and so forth. He's critical of that idea. Instead, he says, Earth is a living system which must be understood as such. And at the bottom line, J.R., he says this living system, planet Earth, must be worshipped.
Amazing.
It is amazing.
You know, the finality of it all is that this world must be controlled by politicians and bureaucrats. Under the cap and trade system, bureaucrats would come around to your house and inspect it. Knock on your door and say, we want to inspect your house. They come in and find out that you don't have the right kind of windows because you leak too much cold or too much heat out into the atmosphere. Or your system of heating and cooling is not up to par, so you have to come up to code. They'll have new building codes. Maybe your roof needs to be replaced by something that has more insulation, or maybe your walls are not insulated well enough. There's a myriad of things that the government can tell you that has to be done. And oh, by the way, we have this union-controlled bureaucracy type construction company that can do this for you for a fee, and of course we'll get government tax money to help you along, but you're going to have to come up with it's just taxing people, and in fact it's going to the plan is to enslave the population, is it not?
Yeah, that's exactly the plan. And as I read Paul Ehrlich's book again, when I wrote this article, I went back and looked at that old book, 1968. And JR, one thing just really came out of those pages. Dr. Ehrlich is a secular man, a secular scientist, and yet what he's describing sounds exactly like what's in the Bible. Collapse of society followed by the rise of a dynamic leader who's going to bring it all back together again and control it. Now, who do we call that man?
Well, in the wherever the future is, the Antichrist is going to put together a one world government and a one world religion, and it's possible that religion is a green religion.
Green religion.
And he's going to put together a one world economic system so that you cannot buy or sell unless you have the mark.
Sure.
And Gary, all of that is a communistic type of dictatorship for your own good, of course, you understand, so that the whole world will have to follow the dictates of the world government.
And JR, it's astonishing to me the degree to which modern man is being prepared for that system. There is a professor, Dr. David W. Orr, distinguished professor at Oberlin College, and by the way, considered a great authority on this subject. He's written a lot of publications on the green religion, one of them called Ecological Literacy. And let me just quote one thing he says here. He writes that he is concerned about, quote, the role education must play in the journey to a postmodern world. Education in the modern world was designed to further the conquest of nature and the industrialization of the planet. It tended to produce unbalanced, underdimensioned people tailored to fit the modern economy. And then he says this, postmodern education must have a different agenda, one designed to heal, to connect, to liberate, to empower, to create, to celebrate. Postmodern education must be life-centered, end quote. Well, JR, when he says life-centered, he's talking about the life of a human being. In other words, it must be humanistic.
Yeah. Evidently, he wants to get rid of industrialization.
Yes.
He wants to get rid of the automobile.
Right.
People go back to walking.
Sure.
It's an unreal world he's dreaming up, don't you think?
Well, it's classic utopian socialism. Man, in his effort to produce a better society without God, is left with one alternative, and that is to produce the perfect environment, which will then in turn produce the perfect man. Unfortunately, that never happens.
Never has and never will.
That's right.
It will only take the second coming of Jesus Christ to put a stop to all of this foolishness, and Jesus can control the environment. By the way, there's a scripture in the Bible that says he holds everything together himself.
Oh, yes.
And you have that verse here in these verses. In Hebrews, let's see if I can find it here. In Hebrews 1 through 3, God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things. By the way, if he is heir of all things, heir to this planet, he's going to take care of this planet.
That's right.
He's not going to let us mess it up, is he?
Well, JR, you know, it goes back to creation, and we are creationists, I hasten to point out. When man was created, Genesis 1:27 and 28, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them, and God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. In other words, man is the caretaker of this planet. And classic Christianity, or Judeo-Christianity, has always recognized the need for good stewardship.
Yes.
It's not as though secular science has to invent the concept of good stewardship, it comes right out of the book of Genesis.
Right.
So,
and so if there is no God, we don't have that demand placed upon us, and they seem to think that man is destroying the planet, cutting down the rainforest, etc. Well, the Bible says, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power. There it is. Jesus holds this planet together. Jesus is going to take care of this planet.
By the word of his power. In other words, he is constantly shifting parameters as required to cause the environment to be such that it's satisfying to him.
Yeah.
If I didn't have faith that the Lord is in control of this planet, JR, I too would be very much afraid. I would be afraid that a meteorite might hit us, or that the sun might flare up, or some horrible thing would happen.
Yes.
But I'm not afraid of that because I believe in God.
There was a movie on television recently on 2 Sunday nights, 4 hours long, called Impact, in which a brown dwarf hit the moon and caused the moon then to fall toward the earth. And the world was really upset, you know. Everybody was going to die. And they demonstrated by people beginning to lose the gravitational pull in certain sections of the world, where trains started rising off of their tracks and cars started flying through the air and people started getting hurt and killed. And of course the end of it was man devised a means by which he could expel that brown dwarf out of the moon's surface. Of course it split the moon, and there was 2 halves of a moon floating around the earth, you know.
Wow.
What a world to live in. If man is the only salvation of this planet, we're in real trouble. But hey, I want you to know there's a God, and he made all things, and he's coming back one of these days to judge all these people who think they can do it without God.
He's the one who made all the greenery that everybody's so worried about. And it's going to be there.
Right. So trust Jesus today, will you? He can give you eternal life. I'm J.R. Church and Gary Striemann. Until next time, keep looking out.